Hello and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun-jung Cho. President Biden and former President Trump are set for a rematch in the race for the White House, having secured their party's nominations. Today we discuss where their policies on South and North Korea will differ.
From the bottom of my heart, I believe in America.
And then when they leave office, they'll even be some decisions are very tough. I can tell you that.
I revitalized our partnership and alliance in the Pacific. India, Australia, Japan, South Korea, Pacific Islands.
North Korea, which is a serious nuclear power, but North Korea came along. Kim Jong-un, we got along very well.
Корейской Народно-Демократической Республики есть свой ядерный зонтик. Они нас ни о чем не просили.
In the studio with me, Mr. Richard Lawless, founding principal of NMV Consulting. Mr. Lawless was former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Security Affairs, and also served as Deputy Head of the U.S. delegation to the Beijing Six-Party Talks. Mr. Lawless has also spent 15 years as a clandestine services officer in the Central Intelligence Agency, where he specialized in nuclear proliferation issues. His recently published book, Hunting Nukes, addresses both South Korea and North Korea's nuclear programs. Also joining us, Mr. Frederick Fleitz, Vice Chair of the Center for American Security at the America First Policy Institute. Mr. Fleitz was the National Security Council Chief of Staff during the Trump administration. Mr. Fleitz was also a CIA intelligence analyst covering WMD proliferation. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Lawless, Presidents Biden and Trump have solidified presidential rematch as both have secured their party's nominations. How do the two presidents differ in their idea of denuclearizing North Korea?
I think it's really an important question right now, and I think it'll flesh itself out over the next 6 months or so, when both parties have to make much more clear how they're going to approach the North Korean issue. That said, I think probably President Biden is inclined, if he wins, to do more of the same, which is what he's doing right now, which is not very much. And President Trump is, as you know, inclined to look for a new opening or a new opportunity to engage with North Korea. So in short, what I would expect, because we now have the two contenders identified, that the North Koreans would think it very appropriate to ratchet up the tensions vis-a-vis the United States in particular, and probably do something in the near term that's highly, that is I would say, a significant provocation aimed at the United States, so that we, to gain the attention of both the Trump and Biden future administrations, and I would expect such a major provocation to begin within weeks, let's say, to, again, draw attention to themselves, make themselves a key issue within the presidential election.
Mr. Fleitz, you're considered to be well-positioned to be reappointed to an important position if there is a second Trump administration. You were recently in the Mar-a-Lago meeting with President Trump and Hungarian Prime Minister Orban. Does President Trump really consider trading nuclear freeze with North Korea and the sanctions relief, as some in the media have suggested? President Trump said that that is fake news. What about that report is fake news?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. It's too soon to say who will be in the next Trump administration. Mr. Trump has to win first. And also, it's too soon to say what Trump's policy will be concerning North Korea. I don't think any specific proposal can be said to be part of Trump's approach, but I think it's clear that Trump will resume personal diplomacy with Kim Jong-un, something which I regret that the Biden administration moved away from. I think there will be a much more active engagement of North Korea at the earliest moments of the next administration to de-escalate tensions, to stop North Korean missile tests, to make sure there's not another nuclear test. And I give the Biden administration credit for their efforts to build relations with Japan and South Korea over the last year, but I think that's been reactive after a policy of neglect. I don't think we'll see a policy of neglect by a new Trump administration towards South Korea, towards Japan, or North Korea.
Will summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un be possible early in the administration?
I don't want to speak for Mr. Trump, but I believe it's probably something he's going to try to pursue. He wanted to have another summit with Kim, but didn't because of COVID in 2020. And I believe he would like to continue where he left off in 2019.
Mr. Lawless, President Trump claims to be a master deal maker, and there is criticism that should President Trump gets reelected, that he may just focus on making a deal with Kim Jong-un rather than pushing for complete denuclearization. Do you agree?
You know, I really agree with most of what Mr. Fleitz has to say. I think re-engagement is necessary. The whole issue in the past has been when you re-engage, what type of arrangements are you looking for? In the past, I think the North Koreans, particularly Kim, felt that he was burned, if you will, by the process because he did not get the outcome he desired to have. The question here is when Mr. Trump re-engages, the people around him, perhaps Fred, perhaps others, are going to set the context of that and the expectations. Because frankly, the expectations the last time were completely somewhat unrealistic, particularly on the North Korean side. So the issue is going to be, as Mr. Trump sets that agenda and engages, which I think he will, who is he going to surround himself with, and how are they going to channel and help Mr. Trump make the right decisions with regard to what he says and does and what he agrees to?
I think Kim is so eager to resume a personal relationship with Trump, we could convince North Korea to stop giving weapons to the Russians for the war in Ukraine. That would be a significant accomplishment. I know that denuclearizing North Korea will be difficult. The Trump administration didn't succeed in doing that last time. They're going to try to do it again. But I think the administration will try to get what it can get and to push Kim very hard to denuclearize and stop the missile tests.
Mr. Fleitz, what is President Trump's definition of denuclearizing North Korea? From the businessman's perspective, is that a feasible goal? And President Trump often compliments Kim Jong-un and talks of their friendship. Is there a strategy, or does he really have high regards of Kim Jong-un?
Kim Jong-un agreed for the first time at the Singapore summit to denuclearize. This was historic. And I believe President Trump, if he is elected again, will try to hold Kim to that and push for full and complete denuclearization of North Korea. There are various permutations and disagreements on what denuclearization means. I know Mike Pompeo had a definition. John Bolton, my former boss at the NSC, he had his own definition. We will see where President Trump comes to do that. But I agree with Mr. Lawless. I think there'll be a very strong team surrounding President Trump to help make these decisions and policies.
Mr. Lawless, former National Security Advisor John Bolton had an interview with VOA about a week ago, and he said President Trump prizes making deals more than the substance of the deals. So if I were Kim Jong-un, I'd think about inviting President-elect Trump to Pyongyang. Do you think Kim Jong-un really thinks President Trump is an easier counterpart than President Biden?
I think what we have referenced the last 3 years, let's say, post-Trump administration. We have the North Koreans probably believing, and Kim probably believing, he's in a much stronger position now to negotiate with President Trump, with a President Trump, or a President Biden. And the reason is he has really doubled down. And he's doubled down in two specific areas. Number one, he wants to show that he can threaten the continental United States and that he has a capability to do so. So when I was suggesting earlier we might see other provocations, I think that provocation will be directed at the United States, maybe another ICBM test, something else that demonstrates where he has brought the North Korean strategic weapons program to date. The second thing he's done is made it very clear that he's not interested in talking to the Republic of Korea, the Yoon administration. He's basically severed that relationship in a very tangible way. I would never expect him to go back to that relationship. So what we have is a regime in North Korea that set the stage for a direct engagement with the Trump administration, probably thinking they're in a great position to do a new deal and call denuclearization something that it is not. But again, it's all going to depend on whether or not Mr. Trump has the right team with him to help in these negotiations.
Mr. Fleitz, senior Biden administration officials highlight the need for interim steps to denuclearize North Korea. This has raised questions about whether they are seeking a nuclear freeze or arms control talks with North Korea. The logic behind the Biden officials is that interim steps is needed in the long process of denuclearization. But there is criticism that such idea may give a wrong signal to Pyongyang that it may be recognized as a nuclear arms state and also saw distrust in Seoul as well. Is there any overlap between the Biden administration's interim steps and President Trump's idea of denuclearizing North Korea?
It's a fascinating question, especially in light of what Mr. Lawless said, because the idea of interim steps is not a new one, and it led to the confusion and Kim feeling burned, especially at the Vietnam summit, when he thought he was getting something, maybe interim steps, because I believe at a lower level, there was some hint by U.S. diplomats that maybe President Trump would agree to that in Vietnam. And we know Kim took this long train ride to Vietnam, and Trump's position was very, very clear, complete denuclearization. So it's interesting to hear the Biden administration talk about that right now when this was discussed a few years ago. I don't think North Korea is interested in negotiating with the Biden administration. I believe they're watching U.S. politics. They're waiting to see whether Trump will win. But if Trump does win, they will want an interim steps agreement, and they're going to have to look back at what happened at the Vietnam summit, what happened in their dealings with President Trump, and realize that Trump is simply not going to give them a concession just to get a deal. I know my old friend John Bolton thinks that he has always opposed direct engagement with North Korea. I think he's wrong on that count, and I think that we will see more direct engagement, more personal diplomacy by President Trump if he wins the election.
Mr. Lawless, although Biden administration did offer to North Korea to meet anytime, anywhere without any preconditions, it's North Korea that has rejected that offer. It takes two to tango, though.
Yeah, and I think this is really important. Again, I'm agreeing in part with Mr. Fleitz because I think the Biden administration has no plan. It's just going to muddle through. And I believe it is inevitable that we will have to have a direct bilateral-led discussion with North Korea, either administration, but particularly when the Trump administration comes in. But there's one caveat that I wanted to add to what I said earlier. Consistently, we have made mistakes, and I believe this was one of the mistakes that was made in the original Trump approach, of not bringing our two most important allies into the equation earlier, making them aware, Republic of Korea and Japan, exactly what we plan to do and how we plan to do it. So more than leaving them to the side as spectators to this drama that we had with the first Trump engagement, we really need to have a plan to bring them in and make them cognizant and make them not necessarily co-parties, but at least reasonably aware. And if we don't do that, we risk squandering the relationship that we have been able to create under the Biden administration, this trilateral relationship between Republic of Korea and Japan. That we put at risk if we don't do this the right way.
And Mr. Lawless, whenever Washington mentions nuclear freeze or arms control, in South Korea, there are growing calls for nuclear armament because they are worried that United States may abandon the goal of denuclearizing North Korea and that they cannot just sit idly by when North Korea gets recognized as a nuclear armed state. Do you share their concern, or do you think the extended deterrence is capable enough to protect South Korea from North Korea's nuclear threat?
Well, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty and angst, frankly, in both South Korea and Japan over a Trump administration because they're potential Trump administration, because in a sense, they haven't been brought into the loop as to what the plan may be. So I guess what I was saying was at the point in time that Trump does have a plan, they have to be brought into the equation. Regarding South Korea, they're a sovereign country, a sovereign nation, and are free to do what they think they have to do for their own security. The last time they attempted to develop a covert nuclear weapons program, they did it external to, outside the alliance. So if Korea does make a decision to re-embrace the potential of a strategic capability itself, it must do so in the context of the alliance. And I think that issue is still very much alive, as you know, in the Republic of Korea, and is the subject of almost daily commentary And part of it is the angst or the concern over a future Trump administration that we do need to address along the way.
And Mr. Fleitz, North Korea specified South Korea as number one enemy and specified South Korea as the target for nuclear attack. Now, do you share concerns that South Korea wants to get their nuclear weapons, or do you think extended deterrence is capable enough to protect South Korea?
Well, I give President Yoon credit for raising this issue in early 2023 to get the attention of the Biden administration that, frankly, South Korea thought that South Korea and the Asia Pacific was being neglected. And it was. The Biden administration was focused on Ukraine. It was focused on the Middle East. And this led to a very good development in 2023 with the trilateral relationship and the leadership of President Yoon in building a much stronger relationship with the U.S. and Japan. I don't think Korea needs a nuclear deterrent. I think it's something that is going to come up if they think that they have to have it. I believe extended deterrence can work. But as I said, I think Yoon has played this extremely well, and his relationship with the United States and with Japan, it's going to continue past this election no matter who wins in November.
Mr. Lawless, you were involved in stopping President Park Chung-hee's secret nuclear program, and this sensitive issue was described in your recent book, Hunting Nukes. Now, the security environment around South Korea today is much worse, with North Korea now a de facto nuclear weapon state. Now, given this threat, if South Korea were to go nuclear again, would you be as committed as in the 1970s to stop this program?
If the Republic of Korea made a sovereign decision to pursue a nuclear weapons development program, one would hope that they would come to us first in the context of the alliance. And I think that would allow us to have again, in the context of a Trump administration, a very serious discussion as to how we would address that continuing concern. I agree that extended deterrence should work. We should be a credible ally. It's all about how we go about doing this. The Biden administration, belatedly, has addressed this issue of extended deterrence and has put in place some mechanisms. I don't think those mechanisms are sufficient, and I think a Trump administration would have to find a way to provide additional assurance to the Republic of Korea as well as Japan with regard to North Korea. That's going to be a challenge.
So, Mr. Lawless, if North Korea were to get a de facto nuclear arms status, that would make South Korea no longer need to comply to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The Article 10 says that each party shall, in exercise in national sovereignty, have the right to withdraw from the treaty if it decides that extraordinary events have jeopardized the supreme interest of its country.
You know, the interesting thing is, I think one of the very positive aspects of the Trump administration in the past, and it should be in the future, was to address the North Korean threat in a realistic way. It is a de facto established nuclear weapon state with the capability of raining destruction on the region and soon the United States, continental United States. So I really think that to answer your question, what we really need to do is at the outset, in setting the context of any negotiations, we are addressing a fellow established nuclear weapon state with a credible capability to use nuclear weapons. And that is, to me, the beginning point of all discussions. It hasn't been to date. And we have to stop this idea of not acknowledging North Korea as a true nuclear weapon state. They expect that acknowledgement, and that's the beginning point of any discussions.
Mr. Fleitz, President Trump in 2016, when he was the Republican presidential frontrunner, indicated that he might support South Korea and Japan getting their own nuclear weapons rather than relying on the United States. Now, does President Trump still think South Korea's nuclear armament would help solve the North Korean nuclear program? There's an expectation in South Korea that President Trump may be more receptive to South Korea's nuclear drive.
Well, that was a statement made in 2016. I don't know where President Trump is or where he will be. I believe he will resume, as I said earlier, personal diplomacy with Kim Jong-un. I don't think his first option would be to discussing South Korea or Japan acquiring nuclear weapons. But I will tell you that I expect a second Trump administration will be very aggressive in making it clear to North Korea that they expect progress in negotiations and that there will be significant consequences, major sanctions if they're not. But I don't think that'll be necessary. I think Kim wants to talk, and I'm hoping those talks will start early in 2025.
The potential of South Korea getting its own nuclear weapons may be a leverage point against Kim Jong-un during negotiations and may also pressure China as well at the same time.
I don't know that I agree with that. I think the prospect of Korea acquiring nuclear weapons would be extremely destabilizing for the region. It will attract a fanatic response from Beijing, and I think the North Koreans will respond very negatively. I don't think it would be productive for South Korea to go down that road.
Mr. Lawless, U.S.-South Korea alliance is considered to have been restored during the Biden administration. The cooperation between Seoul and Washington have expanded, the drills have normalized, and cooperation between U.S., South Korea, and Japan has also strengthened. Do you expect the approach and policy towards South Korea to be very different between Presidents Trump and President Biden?
As Mr. Fleitz says, I cannot predict what a Trump administration strategy or policy will be. However, we've got good momentum in the Japan-Republic of Korea relationship right now. We've got several months left, particularly during the Biden administration and before we get into the turmoil of presidential politics, the entry of the new administration, to deepen that relationship. It's pretty good on many levels, but we've got a long way to go. And what we have coming now, as we progress so far, but we actually have resistance, mainly in South Korea, South Korean leadership, to take that relationship with Japan further. And in all of our discussions with both the Japanese and the Koreans, but particularly the Korean leadership, the issue is this. If you really want to defend the Republic of Korea and have the strongest deterrence possible, you have to realize that part of our deterrence comes from Japan. Physically from Japan and the basing in Japan. And we have to have that acknowledgement on the part of the Republic of Korea that that is the situation. In fact, in the six-party talks, it was very interesting when talking with the North Koreans. One of the reasons they were irate at the Japanese is this mentality they have that they would have won the Korean War in 1950 had it not been for Japan. So they blame Japan for their defeat in the Korean War. So I think it's very important that we make as much progress as possible in the lead up to the new administration in compelling these two countries to deeply integrate their forces.
Mr. Fleitz, President Trump's transactional approach to alliance is causing jitters in South Korea that it may lead to more burden sharing by South Korea. President Trump recently suggested he would encourage Russia to attack NATO members, those who do not pay 2% of their GDP to defense. Now, do you think President Trump might actually ask Seoul to spend more on defense? And more broadly, does President Trump have the will to preserve and strengthen the alliance in the traditional sense?
Under the America First approach to national security, President Trump believes in America working very closely with its allies and in alliances, and he believes that members of alliances should carry their weight. I don't think this is an issue for Japan and for South Korea. It is an issue for NATO, for certain members that refuse to meet their treaty obligations on defense spending. President Trump will say some things sometimes that are part of his deal-making background. Maybe it's posturing. I'm not going to discredit or predict what he's going to do, but I will tell you that this is a man who's been a deal maker his entire life, and he's going to press people very hard for a good deal. But at the end of the day, he deeply values America's relationship with South Korea, and I think it will be very strong. I expect that President Yoon and President Trump will be the best of friends, and it will be a very productive relationship.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Mr. Fleitz, Mr. Lawless, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back here next week with U.S. experts to discuss the two Koreas and the region right here from Washington.